house. And I said skip because it wasn't that good business. It wasn't the wrong timing. It wasn't any hype. There wasn't anything. So I just switched slightly over to do journalist work instead. And I started as a writing journalist. And at that time, I still been reading a lot of crime fiction. And it never ever came to me that I one day should become a writer. And it's not just something I say now because, oh, it's so easy now that I've written all these novels. But the whole idea about crime fiction is that somebody else is doing the writing. And I'm just the one who's enjoying it. So that was the fun part. It never came to me. It wasn't a plan, it wasn't a dream. And I continue as a journalist, and at the time I became a television journalist. And I was starting at a Metronome, and I'm not the only one in here who were there at that time. I'm a colleague. And we were producing some different television shows, and I don't know how much, I don't think it's very hard to imagine, but when you're getting close to deadlines and somebody's waiting for you to deliver, then they can be tough. And they can be yelling and shouting and absolutely just stay away from me, please. And now here is a tip. You can use it for free. At that time when people were really, up and running, I started telling myself stories. Don't close your eyes. Don't show them that you're not listening. Don't let them just yelling and shout. Don't show that inside your head you are totally different place. And I had that idea. What if a journalist who works for one of the newspapers, what if he get into a story that was so dangerous for him so he will get himself killed? What could it be? And that just continued going on in my head. Yelling, shouting, deadlines, I really didn't care. Because I was so curious, what could it be? Was it drugs? Was it prostitution? What was it he was into that was so dangerous? At that time, it wasn't my plan at all to write a book about it, because I actually was quite happy with my job. Not up to deadlines, but in other places, I was quite happy. And the whole idea for me was just, I have a room to escape into. And very, very clear, I could see Louise Rick. She came to me, she's my protagonist, and she came to me, she's so very clear, she's taller than me, slimmer, more fit, and she had a dark curly hair. And I knew her name, and it was totally sad. But to begin with, I thought that she was a journalist like myself, because it was an easy run then. I could just pick up my own experiences from my time at one of the magazines. But later that day, I thought, that is a really, really stupid idea. We have to put her into Copenhagen Police Department, the homicide department, because then there is a lot of research to do. And also because still it wasn't a plan that I should write a book. So it was just, I was curious. And I really liked the idea playing with all these, if she works in the homicide department, how would it be? I've never, thank God for that, been arrested. I've never been into the homicide department in Copenhagen. So it was all my imagination, but the way I couldn't have it, it didn't work for me. And it didn't have to, because it was all for fun. But in that way, I get so curious, because it was like I have Louise Rick, and we were moving on with that, what if a Copenhagen journalist. We were moving on, but it stopped, because I couldn't see her in the homicide department. And for me, it was very important that I could see what was going on, that I could imagine how it would be if it was for real. And it stopped there. So maybe I was stressed, maybe I didn't think, maybe I don't know what I did or didn't. But I was writing a letter to the former chief of the homicide department in Copenhagen, Ove Dahl, and I was telling, which was not quite true, that I was actually writing a crime novel going on in his department. And I was asking him, it's not because I want to go into specific cases, murder cases. It's not because I'm into specific investigation things. I just want to know how it feels to be working in your department. How do you do in the morning? Who are actually brewing your coffee? Where do you park your car? You know, all these everyday details that might not seem very interesting, but it is if you want to show a picture of a place where you go to work, because people actually go there every day. So if I should imagine for myself that I put Louise Rick in there every day, then I really need to know how it feels like. What I didn't count on at that time was that he actually called me the next day and said, but Sara, that sounds very interesting, why don't you come in for coffee? And what happened at that time was that I was like, you know, now we're not that many, so I can tell you it's comfortable. I feel comfortable saying this. When he called me, in my world it could have been George Clooney. That was the chief of the homicide department. I was like, what? and he said, but come on in. And in that second, everything changes, because then I actually went from just having fun in my head to doing research for a new book. And that has become one of the things that I do every time when I started up a new book. I'm really trying to do a lot of research, not just to show off that I can, but because that is the only thing that I know for sure that I'm actually good at, because I've been doing it for so many years as a journalist. So I know when I came in to the police headquarters, I know that I can ask the right questions, so I can set a scene. What if we actually come to work here? How would it be? And I did that at the Forensic Institute as well. And this is a little naughty, is that okay? Mm. Okay. Because way back when I had my publishing house, then I met a forensic pathologist who helped me, well, should help me, reading, you know, if there were anything I need to check. And my way into this contact, that it was a little bit strange, because I got his number from one of my friends. And I was, again, a little bit starstruck, because wow, a forensic pathologist, that is huge. So it gets a little clumsy to begin with. I was like, hey, my name is Sara. What do you know about autoerotic? Do you know what that is? That's when you're having sex and you almost got strangled. And that was just a really bad start on a conversation. Because, you know, you can call it an icebreaker. Because after that, you can ask about everything. Because I said, oh, that is very interesting. I know a little bit about that, actually. And then every door was open. And he is the first person, every time I started up on a new story, on a new idea, he is the first person I ask, what if this happened? How would it be? How would she look like? If she is laying there in the water for so and so many hours, how will that look? So to begin with, I set my scene very clearly. I did all the research so I could see all the facts. And in that, I put Louise Rick into the game and say, okay, what's now? And I think, to begin with, I had another picture of her than we actually know from now, where she is. I put her up a little more like a tough cookie. That's a word I like to use. I've learned it over here, not a big surprise. She was a tough cookie, and I like to see her that way until I start working, writing actually on my first story, because I think that I was about 15 pages in the book when she had a breakdown. She had a flashback very, very early in the book, and I didn't plan it at all. But she had a flashback to that time where she was in the situation where she had to go out and tell a young woman that her boyfriend was knocked down on the street and actually died afterward. And all that feelings that came from that young woman and the emotions and all that makes it so tough for Louise Rick, so she actually had a breakdown. After that, I said, that is really a bad start. That is really, really a bad start. We have to work on that. No, I could delete it. And that was the first time that I had that feeling, it's out of my hands, I'm not controlling this. I've been so extremely, into all the research. I'm doing it very clearly. I know exactly what was going on, had it under control, until Louise Rick took over. Then it was totally out of control. And that was the first time that I experienced what it is to write fiction. What it is not just to stick to the journalist work I normally did, where I was trying very hard to tell what people actually told me, and to, if I was traveling around doing a reportage, then and try to tell the real story. And here the real story was out of my hands. And that was actually a really fun experience, because I could have deleted all of it. Back in my head, I know I'm still the one who has control, even that she's trying to take over. I could have deleted it all, but I didn't, because that was the part of her, and that was the way that she was, and then we just have to work with it, and we've been working quite hard ever since. It's not that bad anymore. She had it almost under control, but she is human, and that was actually what I learned. What I learned at that time. She is human, and I don't have a protagonist who is a superhero. She's like us, and I think that's what I really like writing about her, because she's professional. She likes her job. She hasn't got a boyfriend. At that time when I started writing my books, I was I was a single mom with my son Adam, and everybody, not everybody, but almost everybody asked me, why don't you get a husband and settle down and get a happy life, get a normal life? Why don't you? I said, excuse me, excuse me. I'm quite happy actually, and I have a very good life. Thank you for asking. I think that for me it was a kind of provoking that to be normal or to settle down in a normal life, then you have to have a family. So that was a small comment I want to put in my books, that no, we don't have to do that. It's okay, it's an opportunity, but it's not a thing that you have to do. So I was, when I built up Louise Rick, not for the first book, because I didn't know I was writing a series at that time, to be honest. I thought that was a one thing only, but then when I continue and I saw more stories to come, then I wanted to put that into her, that maybe it isn't the way that we have to be happy just because we have a family. And I found out it could be interesting that there was a reason that she had difficult to connect with a man, for example, and maybe it wasn't her first wish to settle down and have a family. There was a reason for that, and I wouldn't put it into my earlier books because I want us to know her a little better. I want us to be with her, to understand what actually is the reason. But in The Forgotten Girls, the idea to The Forgotten Girls came from different angles. One of them was that is the first of my stories who's set in the town where I grew up myself, in Balsø. I've set a story in Roskilde. It's very easy with all the Danes here because it's easier for me to say, okay, that is maybe about half an hour drive from Copenhagen. But both Roskilde and another story set in Holbæk is about 20 kilometers from the place. I was located in the middle, from the place where I grew up. So it's like I'm trying to come back to my own background. And in The Forgotten Girls, I did. And that was the time where I want to tell Louise's background story. Because when I start thinking about setting my story in Belgium, there was a lot of thoughts coming up in my mind. A lot of these thoughts I had as a teenager, where I didn't feel that I was good enough. I didn't feel that I was as smart as my friends. Or you know, it wasn't because I was an outsider, not at all. But I was insecure, and I didn't know if I was good enough. And when I had my when I fell in love for the first time, you know, not just when I was 10, but when I was around 17 or something, like maybe 18 I think. And when that went over, it was a big loss for me. I was really heartbroken. And I think that makes me a little bit more insecure, or it shows me the way that, oh, maybe it's better to stay out of all that, because then nobody can hurt me. I know when I'm crime fiction writer, then I have to turn up a little bit of the speed when I'm trying to tell that kind of story. So for Louise Rick, when she is looking back, she had tried hard to put all that behind her, because she moved in with her first boyfriend when she was around 19. They rented a house and they moved in together and had the first night there, and the night after she went out with a friend going to a concert, stayed at her place in Roskilde, and when she come back the next morning, he had hung himself by the stairway. My boyfriend didn't hang himself. Good, thank God for that. But so that is the thing that I can do. I can turn it up or turn it down a little. But what I really want to say is that maybe there is a reason why it's difficult to connect or believe in love. That was one point of the story that I wanted to tell. Another thing was, I have, for the first 6 books, I've placed her in the homicide department in Copenhagen. But now I've changed. I've switched over to the special search unit. It is a little new unit in the search, as the department in Copenhagen that searches for missing people. When people are reported missing in Denmark, we say it's about 1,600 a year. Mostly they show up again, but there might be about 4 or 5 cases where it could be a crime behind. And that is these 4 or 5 cases that she's supposed to investigate in that new unit. And she, after my book number 6, she accepted a job offer, because then she could open up her own small unit and she could decide who she wants to work with. She thought. She had plans, all the good colleagues that she know, she could put them in, or one of them in. But it didn't turn out that way, because now she's stuck with Ike Nordström. He is, he's not always very easy to work with. The first day they were not working together, because actually he didn't show up at the Forensic Institute. He had to, but he didn't. And Louise had to go out in Sydhavnen and pick him up from a bar at around 10 o'clock in the morning. He was still drunk and sleeping, and yeah, he was in a bad condition. But he's a nice guy, and he's really a good investigator. So I want to put her into that new special search unit, and it was also because I wanted to look into these cases about missing people. I find it so interesting. I'm so curious when these cases show up and think, what is the story behind it? Where does it lead? Do they disappear because they want to? Or what is the story? And I had an idea. What if we find a body of a grown-up woman close to a lake, close to my own childhood, and nobody have reported her missing. Nobody knows who she is. Nobody knows nothing, and she's very, very hard to identify. She had a huge scar over her face, but there is there is nothing reported. And it ended up then, like it always did, almost always do in these kind of cases, that the police have to go to the newspaper and show the picture. And Louise did the same. And a woman is calling in and say, I think that I know who it might be. Years back, many years back, I was working at a mental hospital, and we had a girl who actually had that kind of scar. It could be her. I'm not sure because it's so many years ago, but it could be her. And of course that leads that Louise and Ike is driving down, and they have a chance to look at the old files. And to begin with, they didn't recognize anything, because there's no Lise Mette. Her name is Lise Mette, and nobody is in the files called Lise Mette. But then a picture fell out of one of them, and it's a girl with the scar. And they see that her name is Lise. And they also find out that she actually died 30 years ago. But they know that that cannot be true, because right at that time she is in the Forensic Institute in Copenhagen, because they're quite sure that's the same person. So what was going on for all these years? Because she must have been somewhere, she must have been out there somewhere. That was one of the stories that got me so curious. When I grew up in Valsø, and not exactly Valsø, 5 kilometers outside Valsø in a forest, close to a forest, there was an old mental institution there. And when I had horses at that time, and when I was riding around, we met some of these people who were placed there. And they were part of a community. They looked a little bit strange. They were a little bit different. They waved. They were happy. Some of them, they were different. And as a child, when we could say everything, nothing was political incorrect, we say that they was gagak. That was the word for it. I'm so sorry. It's very, very unpolite to say that, but that was what it was at that time. And we didn't pay that much attention, because they just belonged there, because we met them every day when we were out there. It wasn't strange at all. But when I was, I had that idea with that mental institution story, and I want to place Lise Mette somewhere out there. Then I start researching about these hospitals. And what really came to me was that I read an article about the forgotten children. And that was what we called these children who was born with a mental disease or a mental handicap. The parents were recommended to place them in an institution. That wasn't strange, we did that. It was a part of the treatment. It wasn't strange, except that could be a little strange now for us to hear that they also recommended the parents to forget about the children. Move on with your life, get a new child, we'll take care of it. So the connection between parents and children doesn't exist. And when I read that article, I of course was thinking about these children we met in the forest back then. And when I hear something about treating children and parents like that, I think, wait, that must have been in the 20s or the 30s, not in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, which it actually was. And that surprised me quite a bit. At that point, I had a storyline set up with Louise Rick, background story, and all these things about forgotten children placed in mental hospitals. Because it wasn't just that they were placed there, it was the way that they were treated. I thought it was, I was reading an article, because then I dig into it, I did a lot of, I spoke with the parents, I spoke with relatives, I spoke with people who actually worked at these places at that time. And one thing that was very interesting, because of course they could feel a little bit, I don't know if it was embarrassed, you know, or sorry that we treated them like that. It was more that the word always came to me like, that was the way we did it at that time. It wasn't meant, I think, as an excuse, more than an explanation. And they were right, because that was the way to treat people and take care of them. In the 80s, most of these hospitals were closed down, and they were brought to sådan nogle steder, hvor man har, you know, where they live together and cook together, and I don't know what. Bofællesskaber.
Community housing.
What?
Halfway housing.
Yes, exactly.
Halfway housing.
Yeah, and that was normal, because then it changes, and now it was the way to treat. And a professor told me when I was, because I was a little bit, what? Did we do that at that time? He said, but Sarah, wait, 20 years from now, and then we look back, then maybe we will have the same question, but whoa, did we do that? Because thing changes. There was a lot of things that we could have been without, I can tell for sure, when I did the research. But I found it so interesting, because now I set my scene, and that is the way I always do it. I set the scene, and it came out from many, many different places. Sometimes it's like, this will never get together and end up in a story. And other times I say, okay, this can fit okay. For example, when I now had that woman, we finally identify her, but when Louise and I got down in the basement looking at these old files, they found out that it wasn't just Lisa who was placed in that mental institution at that time. Actually, she had a twin sister as well. Mm-hmm. And then we were thinking, what if Lisa has been alive for all these years? They were reported dead 30 years ago. They died the same day, few minutes between it. What if Lisa has been alive for all these years? What about Mette? Is she still out there? And then I cannot say much more. But for me it was a journey in many ways, because I've never thought about dragging myself into that kind of emotions when I'm writing. I'm actually trying pretty hard to stay out of my characters, because if I'm putting myself into them, then I will always say, oh no, they cannot do that. I hate writing about sex scenes. Hate it. if I do once in a while, it's somebody totally different. I've never had these experiences. I don't know anything about it. Hate it. Much better to kill somebody. Sorry to say, but it is. Yeah. I didn't have that experiences as well, I have to say. but it's much easier for me to stick with it. So I really try hard not to go too much into my characters, because then I will be too much, oh, I cannot do that, or oh, no, I cannot. But this time, when I actually really came back to Velsø and remember how it felt sitting in the sports hall. Yeah, now, come on, my
gym.
translation.
The gym.
The gym, okay, the gym. The gym. You know, the same noises from the hall and the floor, and yeah. I remember the guy actually who sells candy in the store. There's so many things that I actually forgot that comes up again. And that was interesting. And I think that we can, I think that it's easy to feel in the book that I've been there out there. Not all the way, lucky me, but some of the way I've been there. Are there anything that you would like to ask questions? We open up for questions now. For example, yeah.
So first off, by the way, I wanted to say hi from you just met Anna in Texas, and she's my friend.
Oh, really?
So I just wanted to say hi.
Thank you for coming.
And then I wanted to ask you, because you have so many ideas, and so when you can't all fit it in one book, is that what feeds the next story, many of your next stories?
What do I do then?
Yeah, do
Yeah.
you use some of, because I guess you get a lot of interesting ideas, and well, you can't fit it into this, but this would really be good for a whole other...
Yes, yeah, I do. And sometimes I have to skip it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I'm trying really hard to come up with something that fit the idea, but it doesn't always work that way.
No.
And it's the same for me, that I cannot, when I finish the book and I say, wow, now I'm in the mood, come on. I cannot provoke a story to come to me. I have to wait until the story is ready. And the same is with the idea. I had a fantastic idea, and it just doesn't work. I haven't been writing it down in a book and then came to page 295 and then find out that it didn't work. I've never tried that, but I've tried that. I have something that I really find interesting, but I cannot crack it. But in the book after The Forgotten Girls, it will come out here next year, and it's called The Killing Forest, Dødesporet på dansk. And I had several ideas. Really, I want to put a boy out in the forest. There were so many specific things that I want to write about, and it didn't fit at all. Not at all. So I was having really long walks, very, very long walks every day, because I wanted to fit. And sometimes it's just a little thing that you are missing. And when you got that, okay, everything is going in the right direction, and it can put together a story. But I never thought that this should happen. But I think that I am saving things. If I find things that makes me curious, then I write it down. And I can see articles that is fantastic with some small things, things happening out there, much more weird than I can ever come up with. Much more weird and dangerous and people, crazy people. So I'm trying to put that all in aside, and then I look at it. But for example, I've just published my book number 9 in Denmark, and I know from now on that is the final book about Louise Rick, because I actually had an idea that I need to write on. And that is exactly the way that you asked me. I had an idea and it doesn't fit into a police procedure. So now I had to try, and maybe it will, hopefully it will work, but I don't know, because I haven't tried it yet. But I'm so curious and I want to see what's in it.
Wow. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Could you talk about how some of your ideas must come from real people, and how close do you go to real people out there who could recognize themselves, and how do you disguise?
That's a very good question, because of course some of the I've never written a story based on anything that actually happened.
Okay.
But of course I'm picking up things and themes or topics, and then I'm doing research, and some of the research of course is coming quite close to people, but always with the accept. And the interesting thing, I want to tell you about one thing, because that was from my first book. When I was doing the research around, for example, the crime scene investigators, they told me a lot about how you protect a crime scene out there if it was raining, because I had a body that should be found in a park, and it started raining and they had to put a tent up and all that, and it was very into detail and very specific. And then I think I was I wrote it in around April or something like that, and then we went up to summertime, June or July. Some of the Danes here will remember a very, very, very cruel case in Ringsted about a small, young girl. As she was found. That was a really cruel story because she was sexually abused and she was dead and she was put away in idrætsplads, sports place, yes. And from every day when they start the investigation, it came so close to the thing that I've been written in my book. Mm-hmm. Really, really close. And you know, at that time I knew that I had to take all of it out. All of the story part out of the book. Because I could never ever, I'm writing for entertaining people. And it wasn't entertaining at all. So I had to drag all of it out again. But of course there can be other cases where, or situations maybe more where there are things that is really both useful and a bit of fun to use. For example, I was doing research for a book called Farewell to Freedom, Aldrig mere fri, and we were doing it's about trafficking and prostitution in Copenhagen, and we were out doing a research tour. There was a fantastic lady. There is a place called Reden in Copenhagen. It's a place where the prostitutes can go and have a bite or a nap or a bath or whatever they need, just a break from the life out on the street. And she said, okay, but you want to do research here, then we have to go out for a night walk. I said, wow, that is really interesting, because she really knew the streets down there. And I said, okay, I'm ready. So Friday night we met, and then we went out on a night walk. And there were some situations that were really strange, because Dorit at that time, she was maybe 62 or 3 or something like that, and I was a bit younger than now, but not that much younger. So I was really wondering when people men were slowing down the car and waving the light and say, hey! I say, okay, you cannot see anything because you can have them so much younger if you drive a little further down the road. No, there were so many in that specific research, but it's just been that way in many of my books, I think. But there was a specific situation that was so stupid, and we went down to, because Dorit insists that she want to show me in these sex shops. There was cabins for rent behind, and I don't know. I've been doing a lot of research. I've been doing Eastern European gangsters. I've been doing rocker. I've been doing Muslim. I've been doing quite heavy research, I think. But going down in that sex shop, that was one of the toughest part. Not because I was embarrassed or anything like that, but I was so afraid that I met somebody I knew. Not that they should see, oh, what is Sara doing down here? But how should I react? So, and it wasn't actually that hits me, because I wasn't afraid that people should think, oh, are you a prostitute? They feel free to think about that, because but really hits me was that is the smallest problem the prostitute in that area has, is, do people think I'm a prostitute? Mm. So I could take that. That was okay. But I was really, I think, oh, what if my neighbor is here? How should I react if I see him? That scares the hell out of me. But the fun thing is about recognizing people, or people recognizing themselves in my books. I had actually over the years have some bosses that I slap a little bit now and then. I've actually killed one of them. But in The Forgotten Girls, my mother told me, Sara, please be aware that it might be a very good idea to put in the back of the book that everything is pure fiction. Because otherwise it can be a little hard for you to show up in Valsø after this. and I did that, and actually I had a speech on my old school then, and I was thinking, okay, there can be actually people here that could recognize themselves, and that can be a little bit embarrassed for both of us. And I saw them in the crowd. There was a huge crowd, and I was talking, of course, about it. And then I was thinking, okay, now we got to the questions, and people come up for the signing, and I was a little bit nervous. But you know what? All of them, it wasn't that many, but 2 of them could actually have been put in. They have not that flattering roles in the book, but they don't know it. And they came up to me and said, wow, I really like it. I know who it is. I know who it is. And no, it's not me, because they all see themselves as the cool guys. They don't see themselves as the one that could be actually the, and that was fun. That was really funny. So I said, okay, you can just, I was happy because then and then I turn it up a little bit.
Because they're really not, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then I turn it up a little bit in the next book. I think, okay, if they accept this, then I get it full speed in the next one. Why not? But I'm never afraid about, I'm very afraid about going into details that can hurt people. I will never ever do that. And I'm in some of my books, I'm very specific in autopsy scenes when I go to the Forensic Institute and following in my book the autopsy. Then people said, but do you really go there? I do go there without bodies on the table because of 2 things. I will faint it immediately if I saw it in there. And that's more important. I am writing fiction to entertain people. I could never ever go in and see somebody. I lost both my parents 2 years ago. That is not fun. I could never stood there and say, okay, Mrs. Jensen, whoever you are, oh, very interested, oh, shotgun, oh, right here, okay, interesting, and then go out and make a bestseller out of it. That didn't work that way for me. So I can give them a little if they need it, and if I get too close to real facts, then I have to think it over. But I'm never afraid when I start writing, to getting into specific things, because I know that I'm not using real cases. I picked up a little bit here and a little bit there, and I mix it all together.